Okay, Bob Anderson. I'm super happy to have this opportunity to speak with you. So, Bob, you're someone who I've known for, I guess, about 10 years now, and have always had such respect and appreciation and love for you and everything that you've been up to in the world. Yeah, I'll just read a little piece from your bio so anyone who is tuning into this can have a sense of what you've been up to. So, Robert J. Anderson is the founder and chairman of the Leadership Circle and co-founder and chairman of the Full Circle Group. Bob has dedicated his career to exploring the connections between leadership, mastery, competence, consciousness, spirituality, and business. Over the past 35 years, he has worked to integrate the best of leadership theory and research, resulting in a comprehensive framework for developing leaders, the first universal model of leadership to emerge in the field. The Leadership Circle Profile is a leadership assessment that provides leaders 360 feedback through the lens of the universal model. The universal model and the profile provide organizations of any size in any industry with what they need to measure the effectiveness of leaders individually and collectively, chart a pathway for their development, and then assess their progress as they develop. Forbes named the Leadership Circle Profile one of its top executive development assessments. So, good to be here with you, Bob.
Good to be here with you as well. And when you were talking about our relationship, I felt the reciprocal love that I have for you
Mm,
and
mm,
appreciation for who you are.
mm,
And maybe this gets us traveling, but as soon as you said the way you said it, Robert J. Anderson, I'm named after my dad.
mm,
And so he immediately came into the field. This deep love I have for my dad, who's no longer with us.
mm.
So he's here too.
Yeah, I appreciate you sharing it. I'm actually reminded of one of the really deepest moments I had with you. I didn't anticipate I'd start talking about this during this call, but you sharing that has me reminded of it, where we had Guni Baxter with us at the one of the events in Switzerland that we were a part of. These events were bringing together leaders and people, spiritual practitioners, and people who had positions in various different fields to kind of explore how social transformation can happen on the basis of deep awakening in human beings. And there was a process that Guni ran where all the men were in a line with each other and all the women in a line with each other, and there was an invitation for us, to bring in the energy of all men through time and the energy of all women through time, and the opportunity for people to connect to both lines and allow that to allow that to be felt in their system. And I remember I was stood behind you and I had my hands on your shoulders, and I remember when Guni shared, okay, if you want to start moving in the space and tune into the different energies in the space, immediately I knew I don't want to go anywhere else. You know,
Mm.
I I was raised by my mother. I'm very grateful for that. My father wasn't around so much, and just being in that line of men, there was something, there was something so nourishing for me that when I came out of that practice, my friends who were there were like, John, you are beaming. it was it was like I just got nourished with vitamins and minerals that something in me had waited so long to experience. And part of it was being there with you. And yeah, so I feel like there was a bonding that happened for me there with you, and it doesn't feel different to how I experience some of the deep service and goodness that your work has brought into the world, which is really about developing a foundation of healthy, deep leadership, and
Mm.
yeah, and I've as I shared with you just before this, I've been the conversation I've kind of been in with you for 10 years and that I always want to keep having with you is around how do we support the emergence of healthy, integrated leaders whose hearts and souls are on fire for humanity as one and who are deeply in service and in integrity with themselves and with those they're connected to and with those that they're leading with and the teams that they're working with and so on,
Mm.
because obviously there's such a big shift that is asking to happen on the planet. Like, how do we develop those leaders who can be catalysts in that process? So, I'd love to explore some of that with you.
Well, let's jump in.
Yeah, yeah. So the context here is also, for singularity, for the development of a political movement that is sourced in the health and the needs and the flourishing of the earth as a whole first. I just love to start like, what in your experience, what are the what are the foundations of and what are the needs for the kind of leadership that you see is really necessary in the world today?
Well, as you know, we're at a point of no return.
Mm,
It's that imminent and that serious.
mm,
In the business world, we talk about VUCA, volatility, uncertainty, it's complexity, ambiguity. And then there's Banny now, which is like VUCA on steroids. And that's all true.
mm,
And leaders are challenged mostly beyond our capacity to know how to manage through it. The challenges are that great. Not because they're not brilliant, not because they're not really accomplished, but because the challenges are that great. And that's actually not even the full expression of the challenge. The full expression of the challenge is we have to rewrite civilization altogether.
mm, mm,
The, the very foundational principles and the current order is imploding. It's in its last gasp. And we have to begin anew and rewrite society and our relationship with each other and with the planet
mm,
from first principle, from 0 point. And singularity is not a bad word to start from. I was a year ago, I was on an island off the coast of Georgia, family vacation, and my practice is to get up and go to the sunrise every morning and drink in the just just incredible beauty, and it just opens my heart and soul. So I was getting up to literally just waking up and getting out of bed, and I heard loud and clear in my voice in my head, the infinity of light is your core. It was a declaration, and it wasn't from me. The infinity of light is your core. An infinity of light is singularity. And as you know, I've been studying quantum physics for about 4 years, deeply. And singularity is right at the heart of it.
mhm.
more and more. This emergence of the infinite into the finite.
Yeah.
At every point in the field, every point.
Mhm.
So, and of course, in that system, the presumption is wholeness.
Mhm.
There are no parts. First of all, there are no particles or parts. There's no separate anything. That's the fundamental nature of quantum. It's what distinguishes quantum from classical physics,
Mhm.
is its unbroken wholeness, its inherent unity. And so this is reality. And we've built a whole civilization based on separateness and disconnection and independence rather than fundamental interdependence. And it's taken us remarkable places. I mean, we've done amazing things, but we're now destroying ourselves and the planet. And so leadership now is challenged not only to take on the complexities that are overwhelming, but I need to position, lead, reorient our business so that it's of service to a new emergence,
Mhm.
founded on a new paradigm of unity, of wholeness, of singularity, and somehow position the business to thrive and renew the planet. So we are working, for example, with an organization called Syngenta.
Mhm.
Syngenta has been a chemical company,
Mhm.
and this is all public knowledge, so I'm not speaking out of school. That kind of chemical uh, is not wanted in a lot of countries now
Mhm.
because of harmful effects to the environment, people, and so on. So they have the challenge of reorienting their business, but they've actually chosen to take on, and they've merged with other companies, and it's one of the largest companies now in agriculture in the world. We can renew the planet through agriculture.
Mhm.
They're serious about it.
Mhm.
How do we rethink agriculture altogether
Mhm.
so that it's safe and sustainable and actually reforests and renews the earth?
Mhm. Mhm.
They don't know how.
Mhm.
No one person could know how to do that. They're working with climate scientists, they're working with Nature Conservancy, they're serious.
Mhm.
And that's what I'm talking about.
Mhm.
That kind of leadership is now required of all of us.
Mhm.
And it demands um, a kind of facility or mastery uh, for working in the unknown.
Mhm.
Like, because we don't know. I mean, literally, we have no idea how to create that future. And so leaders are challenged more and more to lead together into and from the unknown. And it's at that edge, which is a scary edge, that breakthroughs can emerge, something new, because the unknown, the empty space is not empty.
Mm.
This is a part of the paradigm that needs to fall away.
Mm.
We think the empty space is empty.
Mm.
There is no empty space. It's an immense field. The math actually goes to singularity, except it's renormalized to the Planck scale so that we can actually use it. But the math goes to singularity, infinity, 0 point. There's that much energy in the field, and energy now in physics is information. So we're in a field of immense energy. I mean, it's unfathomable how much. They did a calculation. This is straight quantum field theory. 1 cubic centimeter of quote empty space has more energy in it than is tied up in all the mass of all the galaxies in the universe.
Mm.
So what's emerging is a minuscule amount of energy
Mm.
from the source condition.
Mm.
And we're plugged into that. And it's an immense field of information. So leaders can, with practice, open together into a dialogue, a deep dialogue that's both safe and highly resonant.
Mm. Mm.
Highly resonant, to be informed by what might want to happen. I was working with a organization, and I won't mention the country, but it was healthcare, and they're the largest healthcare system in that country. And they came in because of the VUCA. I was like, it's going to get even crazier, and we're not ready for it. We don't have a clear vision and strategy as a extended leadership team. So we had the entire extended leadership team for 3 days.
Mm.
And the CEO came in and was like, okay, we got to get to it. Here's the agenda. Here's what we got to bing, 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 bing. Great guy. And he, we just paused him and said, could we just get connected here and kind of check in with each other? And to be honest with you, I can't remember anything we did in terms of structuring or that meeting. But at the end of 3 days, a vision of what they could be in that country emerged that stunned them.
Mm.
They literally were looking at the vision and the early strategy and going, who would have thought of this? Nobody had this when we came in.
Mm.
That will revolutionize healthcare in this country.
Mm.
And we're the only organization in the country that can do it. And it wasn't a competitive play, it was a cooperative play. They were in tears. Now, that's what I'm talking about. How do we slow down, create the resonant field, and really inquire? It's beyond sort of really good conversation.
Mm.
It's a deep listening to what's emerging at the edges of our inquiry.
Mm. Mm.
And that can be enhanced with both personal and collective practices.
Mm.
that have been in the contemplative traditions for millennia. Anything that brings more coherence to my field, to my body and field. Everything's a field. The body is a field. There is nothing that isn't a field.
Mm.
Einstein said that there is no matter,
Mm.
just now standard physics.
Mm.
It's only energy at a frequency.
Mm.
What we call matter is a lower frequency of energy,
Mm.
lowered enough to be perceptible. Protons aren't particles, they're energy structures. We don't fully understand all that yet, but they're not particles.
Mm.
And they're not separate. The electron is not separate from, it's an emergence in a field that's universal. It's everywhere. And it happens to, we call it, there's an excitation of the field.
Mm.
We call the electron, but it's not separate. It's emerging from a field which is everywhere. So interdependence and wholeness is built into the whole thing. And so there are practices which allow us to access that information. We know this from our cell phones. Information travels on microwave frequencies,
Mm.
resonance.
Mhm.
And you've got a decoder that can decode that.
Mm.
Not different from our brains. In fact, I just interviewed a leading neurologist, about to post it on our website. One of the top neurologists in the world on stroke epidemiology and so on. He's written 370 academic papers, public peer-reviewed papers, 8 textbooks,
Mm.
world-renowned. Basically is saying in the first line of his book, one of his books is, your brain is not responsible for your consciousness nor your thinking. It's a transceiver. It's a frequency step down unit from higher orders of who you are, to this dimension of who you are, to the classical, converting it into electrochemical pulses and so on. So there's an emergent paradigm that we're understanding, which suggests that we can actually access this field. Einstein talked about it all the time. Poincaré talked about it. That this neurologist, David Wiebers is his name, became very curious about these practices and had spent quite a bit of time, and they were vexed by a problem in healthcare that had to do with strokes. And I won't get into the problem, but the whole field was like stumped by the data. There was conflicting data about aneurysms, and nobody could solve it.
Mm.
Everybody, he was at the Mayo Clinic, but this was a worldwide effort. 2 really significant bodies of research did not line up. And he got the solution one day. Boom, it all came in at once. He calls them thought balls. And it took them 20 years to do the research, and it all proved out. And it wasn't him doing the research, it was the global community of neurological research. And it all proved out.
Mm.
Significantly improve their understanding of the progression of that disease, the stroke epidemiology, and so on. That's one application of this.
Mm.
Same thing happened with that leadership team. And so there are practices individually and collectively, dialogue practices that we can use, I think, that help us to emerge the future that's trying to come through from the unknown.
You're really
That's the
speaking.
kind of leadership we need today, more and more. And it's way beyond where the field is. The field is mostly working at what we've called creative leadership, which is really important that you make that step. It's vital from a more reactive uh, kind of leadership to creative. And most of the change efforts that we're involved in, they're really clear that if we don't make this shift, the kinds of organizational culture and structure that we need for high performance in this environment aren't going to happen. The leadership has to make the journey, or what we're envisioning for the high performance of our organization won't happen. And I'm suggesting that beyond that is the territory where leaders need to go.
Could you give us, Bob, just a little like essence rundown of these stages of leadership that have been part of the universal model of leadership that you've developed, so that people can just get the essence of where you're locating the type of leadership that's really needed today?
Yeah, the universal is a bit of an arrogant word. It doesn't mean that we figured everything out.
Hmm.
It simply means that it's a pretty thorough integration of the field of leadership psychology, including spirituality and so on. And much of it, every dimension in it, has a universality about it.
Yeah.
You know, um, it's in every culture. You
Mm.
know,
Mm. Mm.
so take one dimension, the need for over control.
Mm. Mm.
Well, we see that every culture, east, west, north, south, doesn't matter.
Mhm.
Be a domineering leader.
Mhm.
And there's a whole psychology about that.
Mm.
So the first adult stage development, of course, we watch our children. I got a grandchild now, 16 months. And you watch, them morphing through various. Adults can morph too if they do the work. And the first adult stage is to enter society on its terms.
Mm.
Okay, I'm coming out of adolescence, and there is a way things operate, and I got to get on with it in order to get along with it. So we take it on, but we don't realize we're in what Bob Keegan at Harvard says, socialized mind. We have adopted
Mm.
to a large degree, more than we know. It's kind of on autopilot. Here's who I'm supposed to be and how I'm supposed to be. So we're authored more by external authority or others than we know. And then the core identity there is you make me up. I'm living to your expectations. People in my immediate surround, bosses, peers, directs, but also people in my past, dads, churches, cultures, society, all those expectations. This is who I'm supposed to be. Not to be that is not to be. I lose myself. This is me. This is right. So that's the socialized, and it's run by fear. I'm playing hard not to lose face, not to disappoint,
Mm.
not to fall from grace, not to lose credibility, reputation, and advance my career. It's a perfectly normal, natural stage of development. You can't not go through it.
Mm.
Most will live there their
Mm.
whole life. The next stage is self-authoring. I start to notice my autopilot need to have people approve of me, for example.
Mm.
Oh, I'm okay if you like me, respect me, admire me. And I can start to see the limitations of that, especially in complexity. It worked fine. It's got me here. It's taken me so far. Now I'm in a reality that's just far too complex for that.
Mm,
And I need to be able to, I'm good with people, but I'm overly dependent on people's
mm,
approval. So I need to really step into power more and be courageous and direct and advocate for what I want. That's just one form of reactivity I'm describing. But the notion is, I I see the illusion of it. My worth is not in your hands. You do not define me. My future is not defined by others.
mm,
I step into, once that gets seen powerfully, I go, what would I do if I weren't so worried about? Who would I be? What would I create if I weren't so caught up in needing to be so brilliant all the time, or
mm,
uh, always chasing results, always needing to be in control? Oh, that opens up a whole new possibility.
mm,
And so the self-authoring phase is authored by an internalized self now, not an externalized self.
mm,
Psychology, they call it external versus internal locus of control. And
mm,
that's a major fundamental step in adult development.
mm,
I'm I'm now focused on a sense of purpose and vision that matters to me, that I'm trying to create. It's an expression of my soul, if you will.
mm,
And I work cooperatively now with others to try to create an organization that's an expression of that, a contribution. Very important and shift. And only about 20% of adults, maybe even less, will fully make that shift.
mm,
About 15, 20, somewhere in there, that research suggests. Some are in transition, others are in more of the reactive. And so what I'm suggesting is beyond that. It's beyond self-authoring. I start to realize there are many markers here, but I start to realize that I am this self-authoring self. I've worked really hard to become an expression of all that's important to me.
mm,
And I'm also its opposite.
mm,
This is where Jekyll meets Hyde.
mm,
I love you, and I have parts of me that, if provoked, would do you harm,
mm,
would violate you. And both sit in me. I start to realize that my well-honed perspective on reality, especially in embedded conflict, is partial. I don't have the whole picture. Hence the need for my opponent,
mm, mm,
right?
mm,
It they're bringing a corrective.
mm,
And so as I start to see myself as an ecology of conflicting opposites, I don't project them onto you.
mm,
I don't make you an enemy. Oh, I have that in me too. Let's talk. My position is partial. So what are you bringing to me that I might not want to know, but need to know? Or that we need to know in order to really break through to a synthesis at a higher order of innovation or structure or application or and so this is a very high order operating system, and about 5% of leaders can work there. And that's the work that I'm now really trying to articulate and bring in more into the field. What's not as present in the field is this access to our intuition and the meta capacities that we have, but aren't supported by our separatist, materialist, classical paradigm.
Mm.
For example, they've done rigorous experiments, both in the military and in major educational institutions, on remote viewing, the ability of people to see something in another country with accuracy,
Mm.
given geographic coordinates or whatever. There are different ways they construct the experiment. And when you do the meta studies, the odds of that being chance for normal people, this is not the gifted psychics, this is normal people.
Mm.
The odds beyond chance are 10 billion to 1. So we have meta capacities that we need now. And they're mostly dismissed as, yeah, that's a, touchy feely woo woo new age gobbledygook. No, it's physics, and we need it if we're going to break through. So this integral leader can sit in conflict and stay open.
Mm.
What is it I need to learn here?
Mm.
What is my opponent, even my enemy, trying to help me learn, us learn?
Mm. A question I have there.
Gorbachev showed up at Reykjavik and said, I'm here to deprive you of an enemy.
Right. Yeah.
That's the stance.
That's really what I wanted to ask you about. That kind of takes it into it, which is I feel like this is the last question I have the opportunity to ask you today, but how, I mean, basically the kind of leadership that you're speaking into there would be revolutionary in politics. It would blast through so much of what we even understand as politics. And I'm curious about that. Like, how does that feel to you? Like, what do you sense is even possible there if that type of leadership were to be cultivated in the kind of political domain?
Well, obviously would change everything. We're so far from that. We
Yeah.
are so far from that. In this country, it's just horrific. And we're not alone, but it's just awful.
Yeah, you're not alone. Yeah.
It's it's early stage
Mm.
politics,
Mm.
which is polarizing and demonizing.
Mm.
Uh, it's early reactive, the way it's being played out.
Mm.
If not stages just prior to that, adolescent, opportunist. And so we have a long way to go in politics, frankly. So, how does it look in politics? Well, it's the politics of Gandhi.
Mm.
Gandhi was a political leader, Mandela,
Mm.
King.
Mm.
It's very, very different, and it works. Um, I think it was the politics of Gorbachev,
Mm.
you could almost watch his progression um, from a bureaucrat in Russia to leading perestroika and a complete move toward freedom and breaking apart of the Soviet Union and independence, and restoring of individual freedoms and so on. And then shows up at Reykjavik and says, we're not so different, you and I. We call each other these names. And I build bombs and so do you. So we're 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 dance partners in a system.
Mm.
And I stop the dance.
Mm.
I disarm. I'm here to deprive you of an enemy. So we have seen examples of this in politics, but it's rare. And even in our activism now, which we talked about before we started this, it's punitive, it's condemning, it's not coming from a place of, see, that the beauty of the integral leader is they've come through the wound. And I mean deeply. So one of the markers is the capacity to engage in embracing my shadow, embracing, facing, meeting that part of me that would do you harm,
Mm,
would violate you. And King's uh, center etched into one of the walls as a statement, how could I violate you when you are me?
mm, mm,
And this is physics now. Everything is emerging as one,
mm,
from one.
mm,
And the deep spiritual principle is unity, is
mm,
singularity. I am you. You are me. We are not, at fundamentally, we are not different. We're different expressions of one.
mm,
So, um, but then there's the deep embrace of what's in me that's the opposite of that.
mm,
And as I do that work personally and collectively, we can stay open in a bitter conflict. And so a lot of the advocacy that's so necessary that we change, say around climate change or racism, gender identity, so on, it's like vital that we make these transformations, but the process is often highly aggressive and blaming
mm,
because it isn't yet coming from where a Gandhi or a King or a
mm,
Mandela came from, which is a hugely open heart. Oh, you have that in you too. Let's talk.
mm.
My version of that sounds a little different, but it's really not structurally. It's the same. And that's a very different place from which to affect change. So I do think it's a big move. It's a big move in any, as I said, only about 5% of adults are in this capacity. So to have it be politics, which, the interesting thing about politics is I have to please the public. And the normative consciousness is actually pretty early compared to what I'm talking about. So it's a real dilemma for a politician. Jimmy Carter's a good example. Jimmy Carter, I think, was breaking into this at an early level and hadn't yet landed how to make it really practical. So he gets criticized as being ineffective as a president of the United States, rightfully or wrongfully, but certainly afterwards he emerged as a world leader that is an example of what we're talking about.
Beautiful.
There are others around the world I'm less familiar because of not being in some of those cultures. I'm sure there are other examples we could point to here.
Yeah, there definitely
Rare.
are. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, it's still rare, but yeah, I mean, this is the type of leadership that must arise now. It must arise in the context that we're collectively in. And yeah, I find myself super inspired by many different points that you're making, and feeling the implications and invitations of what that would mean, for the emergence of political leadership. Because I agree that I think there is a challenge, a huge challenge for political leaders to move from this depth and at the same time, deal with the expectations of them. But as the kind of leaders that you're mentioning exemplify, there's such a magnetic yes that also, can come when, there's such a longing, I think, as well um for leaders of that kind of depth and catalytic energy. And I think and that itself speaks to the polarity that exists within us of how much we deeply distrust power and how much there's a longing for more mature exemplars of the leadership that is needed. So
Right.
I feel like this is a conversation I want to continue with you, Bob.
All
um
right.
we'll close for today, but I would love to talk more into this with you and
Absolutely.
generate, a field which can really inform the way singularity goes forward on the basis of the wisdom and the insights that you have generated and are generating in the work that you're doing.
I look forward to those conversations. Any chance to hang out is a good chance.
Yeah.
Good. So
Thank you, brother.
do that. Yeah.